You are listening to the Midnight Movie Snack Podcast with Chris and Garrett. Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of the Midnight Movie Snack Podcast with Chris and Garrett. I'm Chris, and in this episode, Garrett and I had the privilege of speaking to the charming and talented Deborah Goodrich Royce, one of the stars of the 1985 teen comedy, Just One of the Guys. Since the 80s, Deborah has carved out an amazing career as an actress and story editor and is now finding critical acclaim as a novelist. Her latest book, released this week, is Ruby Falls, a story that would be right at home with the works of Alfred Hitchcock. We talked to Deborah about her life in television and movies, her family, and how the great Gene Wilder helped shape her future as a writer. So, without further delay, here's Deborah Goodrich Royce.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks. Sorry, I'm a couple minutes late trying to get some stuff together, but
That's okay.
yeah, welcome. It's good to have you here.
Thank you. So now, are you in North Carolina too?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're just talking about family roots and migrations, and I have family from there, but long ago.
I see. Yeah. I was born and raised for most of my life. I've been in North Carolina.
Well, thank you for having me. Now,
Thank
Garrett,
you.
it's your mother I sent the book to.
Yes.
Well, that's so much fun. I hope she likes it.
I'm sure she's going to love it.
I'm sure she will. Yeah.
And Chris knows my mom very well. I told you how she taught him in kindergarten. So I feel like that's why he's my friend still. It's like my mom had to kind of bribe him to become my friend. I don't know.
Yeah. Knowing Cece, she's going to love these books.
Good.
I'm sure she will.
It's wild. It's like both my parents love All My Children. They started watching it, I think, when my mom was pregnant with me. And my dad would come home on his lunch break, and they'd come home and whatever. And so my mom was pregnant; she was home, and so I think they started watching it. So my dad, which you don't think about many men really getting into soap operas that much, especially back in the late '60s, early '70s, and that point in time. But my dad, still to this day, he knows more about All My Children than most women. I mean, he knows a lot. It's really.
Well, you would actually be surprised because back in the day, I mean, if people recognize you, they recognize you, and it means they're watching the show. Mm-hmm. And I would walk through airports and so many men would go, oh! And so they might say they don't watch the show, but more did than you would know.
So there's so much that, the past couple of days, I've been spending time kind of reading up on your filmography, the things that you've been up to since starring in Just One of the Guys. And I got to say, I was just pleasantly blown away by just all of these awesome things that you've done over the years. And now to be a novelist and writing these books. And I know we've talked about Garrett's mom. I actually purchased the books for my wife because both of the books, reading the descriptions, they're right up her alley. So she's looking forward to reading those.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So I thought we would just, kind of start. We've been talking about All My Children and working in the soaps. And I thought we would just kind of chronologically maybe kind of go through things, talk a little bit about Just One of the Guys, because we're doing a movie commentary about it this week. And then from there, talk about some of the work that you did when you went to Paris or went to France, and some of the Miramax work. And then the last part of our conversation, I thought we could focus on your novels and focus on what you have coming up next. Does that sound okay?
Perfect.
Awesome. So we're talking about All My Children. And, I know that just from what I know of soap operas and actors who work in soap operas, it is a very demanding type of work. The times that is involved, having to learn all of those lines. What was your experience like for the time that you worked on All My Children?
Well, my experience on All My Children was exactly what you're saying. The days are long. They ran from 7 in the morning till 7 in the evening. and the actors got through 90 pages of dialogue a day, which is a lot when you consider, back then, and I can't really speak about what it's like now, a nighttime TV show would maybe get through 10 pages of dialogue a day, and a movie maybe 2. So it was a massive amount of work. It was 3-camera video at the time, and it was always shot in an enormous sound stage with all of the sets going around the outside of the big space, like a warehouse almost, 3 walls with an open front, and the cameras would just scoot around, and because all the sets were lined around the side. So at that time, when I was on the show, this was after live soaps. So we would get the scripts about 2 weeks in advance, so we could read ahead to see what was coming 2 weeks ahead. But that's as far as we could really go. I don't know if Susan Lucci, who was the star of the show, if she had more insight into the long range vision of where the characters were going, but I sure didn't. But so really, you would spend the night before learning your lines as best you could. So there wasn't much life outside of work in that period.
I imagine your weekends were just recuperating from the previous week and getting ready for the week to come.
Very much so. I mean, I just would, lie low and kind of pull myself together.
So one of the things I've always been curious about, because of the breakneck pace of soaps, is you've got to learn all of these lines and all of these pages, like you mentioned, like 90 pages. Was there a lot of room when you were filming or taping? If you flubbed a line, or if somebody forgot something, like, did you have opportunities to do retakes, or is it just, you better get it right the first time, or maybe the second time if you're lucky?
Now, we were able to do retakes. We didn't do that many. So the structure of the day, coming in at 7, you would rehearse it upstairs in just regular rooms and get your blocking from the director. And then, so that was half the morning. The second half of the morning, no, actually, that was the whole morning. And somehow, by the time lunch was over, getting yourself into hair and makeup when you could. And then the afternoon was doing the whole thing on the set, a dress rehearsal, and then shooting it. So every minute of the day was full. Most actors on soaps don't work 5 days a week, though. If you have a very busy storyline, you might have a period like that. So when I was on All My Children, there were really seasoned actors that you would remember from movies that you looked at in film class. Ruth Warwick was on All My Children. She was in Citizen Kane.
All right.
Citizen Kane with Orson Welles.
Yeah.
She played the wife. And by the time I was on All My Children in the 80s, she had to have been the age I am now. I mean, I just thought she was about 3,000. But, it was a job, I think, for actors like that who had had the heyday of their careers. Actors like that worked maybe a day a week, maybe 2 days a week. So I think she probably had a really fun life doing that. It's a good gig for a mature actor.
Yeah,
I could imagine so.
So was there any other like young actors who I was looking at the list of people who were on during that time frame? Like I saw like Amanda Beers, I think is how you say her name, and Kim Delaney. Was any of those people, did you make good connections with any of those people who were about the same age as you coming along at the same time? I mean,
yeah, I worked with Kim Delaney, and I don't think we ever had any scenes together. The storylines are very separated, but we had a mutual friend, Amy Steele, who was on another soap, and then she was in Friday the 13th.
That's right, I remember Amy.
So Amy and Kim were really close, and Amy and I were close. So I would kind of hear about Kim, but didn't really stay in touch with her. Who else was on? Debbie Morgan, really beautiful African-American actress. She was my dressing room mate, really lovely lady. Yeah. I'm trying to think who I ran into. I ran into Susan Lucci last year. I had
really?
not seen her in over 30 years. And
Wow.
we saw each other and we said a very nice hello. And she said, I have your book. So that was kind of nice.
That's nice.
That's awesome.
That's great.
That is great.
So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you were, I really tried to do as much research in the past couple of days as possible. So you were with All My Children for about a year. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And so then after that, I think you started to move into other projects, films and television. And then, of course, one of the main reasons why we're here, the three of us talking, is Just One of the Guys, which I don't know if Garrett has shared anything when you guys first got on the call. It's a movie that came along at a time we were definitely the key demographic for that movie. And the fact that it was at a time period where if you didn't catch it in the theater, chances are you rented it or you were watching it whenever it came on HBO. And that's often the case for Garrett and myself. There's a lot of movies from the 80s that we just love because we got to see them so many times. And Just One of the Guys is one of those. So I've heard about, how you got involved in the movie and, and kind of what led to your auditioning for it and getting into it. The thing that was really of interest to me as I was doing research is the fact that it was a movie, a teen comedy that had a woman director, which at the time, I can't think of many women directors in that time period, especially doing a teen comedy. I mean, I think there was Martha Coolidge was one director out there at the time, but what was it like? You're in this big studio movie, Columbia Pictures, and you're working with a director who's a woman. Was it refreshing? Was it something that you were already accustomed to? Maybe you worked with other female directors. What was it like, having a director on the shoot as a woman?
Well, we did have at least one woman director on All My Children. So I had worked with a woman director, and you do know the story. So I was driving my boyfriend to the lot to audition for the role of Joyce's boyfriend, remember the older boyfriend?
The college boyfriend.
College boyfriend. I can't think of his name was Lee, who played it. Anyway, and it was one of those, I got the movie and he didn't, and I hadn't even gone there to audition for it. So great for my career, not so great for the relationship. I gotta say, that's not really a good luck when you drive your boyfriend to get a job and you get it and he doesn't. But so the set, by the time I got there, they had been working for a few weeks. Mm-hmm. So there was really an established bond of friends. I became friends with a lot of people. I'm still in touch with Joyce Heiser, with Tony Hudson, with Ken Tiger, who played the teacher.
Great actor.
Yeah. And his husband, Mitch Genunzio, was one of the writers. And who else am I in touch with? Loosely with Ari Gross, with Cliff Roner. So it was a really wonderful set to be a part of. And Lisa was really a crackerjack director. I think she went on after a while to be at either the head of the film department or professor in the film department at the University of Miami. Yeah. So she's a really smart woman and a very competent director and funny.
Yeah, it's so evident when you watch the movie. And the movie was something, as I mentioned earlier, I watched quite a bit in my teenage years, but I watched it again recently in preparation for our commentary. And, it's just so well put together. And you mentioned something about the camaraderie between you and your castmates. It's really refreshing when you watch a movie and you can pick up on that. You can just see in the performances that this is a cast that really gets each other. And there's just really good chemistry. They're clicking in a special way. And I also was fortunate enough to see some of the screenings that you guys had done a few years ago when you reconvened as a cast to talk about the movie. And it's just really nice to see. You can pick up on it when, like, yeah, these people really liked working with each other, and it shows in the performances, I think. And, the direction I thought was just top notch. It is a very solid teen comedy. And I think and I was going to mention April Fool's Day, which, I know came a year later. To me, those are films that are so criminally underrated because they came at a time where there were other movies in the same kind of genre. And for whatever reason, they didn't quite connect like the other ones. But what's great is I feel like now people are really looking at those movies and saying, you know what, these were really good. And so yeah.
Well, that's true. I'm having that experience. There have been these reunion screenings. There are interviews like this. The American Film Institute, which is, the pinnacle of the feature film world, just asked me to do a commentary on a scene from April Fool's Day. They ran it on April 1st. The Hollywood Reporter just did a retrospective of 91 years of their existence as a magazine, the Hollywood Reporter, and picked films to represent each of those years. And one of the films from 1986 was April Fool's Day, which I think that film was very underrated because it's kind of a genre splitter. It's a comedy and it's a horror film that really isn't a horror film. And I don't think people knew really what they were getting into. It's interesting when you trick the audience. So, but it's fun to see my son-in-law, who's in the financial world. Well, we were chatting about this the other day, and he had a great expression I'd never heard. He said, "Quality ages well."
It's true.
So
it's true. Absolutely. Yeah. It's those are films that, I just enjoy watching again and again. And I think,
it was the trailblazer. I think April Fool's Day. I was talking to Chris earlier about this. It's that you have stuff like Happy Death Day, and there's the newest movie with Vince Vaughn, and they do the comedy and the horror together. It's a new thing now, but it's not a new thing because you guys did it first back in the 80s. And I think that's kind of like set the precedent. It was really a trailblazing type of thing to me. I think I thought it was excellent.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things, just to go back to Just One of the Guys for a moment, I had read that the rehearsal schedule and the shooting schedule, that you guys actually shot that movie in chronological order. Is that correct?
Wow, that's a great question.
It's such a rarity. I always hear about movies being shot out of order, but I had come across a little piece.
They are. And I was not in every scene the way Joyce was. Joyce would know. We should speed dial her. I don't know. Okay. That's a good question.
Yeah. One thing I noticed from the movie is, like, I think the pictures from you from when I've seen online and from what I remember of the movie is that your fashion is like, I think you epitomize 80s fashion.
Oh yeah.
In that movie, to me, it's like there's certain things. I mean, I know your hair is not naturally curly, like mine's naturally curly, but like you had the perm thing going on. Your clothes looks, but it's great 80s fashion. It's not bad 80s fashion. It's not like, oh no, don't look at me, but it's really good. I think I don't know. I think it kind of epitomizes like the time period of what high school girls wanted to look like and be like, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. The costume designer was fantastic. I can't remember who it was, but yeah, I look back at the clothing and I think it is exactly right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it hit it right on the head. The thing about this movie, and I know during that time period, you had John Hughes and his movies, but there was something about this movie that I felt like they really got the sense of the look and feel of a high school. Like it more so, like some other movies are a little more stylized. They're a little more trying to look like a music video or something like that. But I felt like this movie captured it in a much more practical, kind of down to earth way. But I agree with Garrett. I was making an observation when I was watching it recently that, yeah, the costume design in this movie, they really nailed it. And of course, the clothing that Joyce wears when she's passing as a boy, it's like, that's really, like, today I could see somebody wearing those, really stylish, the kind of things that she wore. that I could totally see somebody pulling that look off today. So in some ways, it's kind of a timeless quality, I guess. But yeah, it was some really great costume design in the movie as well. So after working, there was one other thing I wanted to bring up, and I touched on this in one of the Instagram posts that we put out there. So the storyline, obviously, I think owes a little bit of a debt to William Shakespeare with Twelfth Night. And so again, you guys were trailblazing in that. You were one of the first high school movies that was borrowing from William Shakespeare. Then like later on, we had 10 Things I Hate About You, which was, I think, Taming of the Shrew, and then Clueless, which was based on Emma. But did you guys, like when you were working on the movie, was there ever any discussion, like the writers or Lisa saying, yeah, we're kind of doing a send up of Twelfth Night, or is it just a happy coincidence that it happened to coincide with the premise?
So I knew, because I did become so close with Ken and Mitch. They're still good friends, and Mitch was one of the writers. So I knew it was referencing Twelfth Night. And they also had film references, the name of the high school.
That's right. Yes.
The character Greg Toland. There were many references, just little winks that, and we can talk about this later when we talk about Ruby Falls. Yeah. I think those kinds of things are a lot of fun if you get them, but they don't ruin it if you don't. You have to, movies, books, they kind of have to come at you on different levels. It's like watching cartoons. If you think back to the cartoons you watched as a kid, and if you watch them now with your kids, a lot of cartoons were delivered in a much more sophisticated way that would appeal to adults, particularly the classic ones.
Oh, yeah.
And the kids didn't get them on that level, but you, the adult, now can.
That is so true. That is so true. I have 3 boys, and I was able to share with them a lot of the things that I watched growing up. I know Garrett and I have talked about this in the past as well. And it's amazing watching those things. I haven't seen some of them since I was a kid. And to have that perspective now as an adult, like that totally went over my head when I was a kid. And it went over my kid's head, but I got it. So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. So after Just One of the Guys and April Fool's Day, you spent a few more years working in television. And I was looking through your filmography and was pleasantly surprised, because I remembered some of the sitcoms that you were involved in. Like there was one, Day by Day, with Julia Louis-Dreyfus. I remembered that episode. I remember watching that show. And it brings up an interesting phenomena, I guess is what you would call it, so watching you and watching the other actors like Clayton and Joyce, and seeing you guys show up in the following years on television shows or in movies, it was always this great moment of like, oh yeah, she was in this or he was in this. And so I remember after the movie came out, just seeing you crop up. And one of the things that you showed up in that you were terrific in, but the movie just completely unhinged me, was the Ted Bundy movie that Mark Harmon starred in. Prior to that movie, and I've talked with Garrett about this, Mark Harmon, I thought, was like, this great actor and had this great personality. He was so utterly chilling in that movie that it's like, to this day, I still can't look at him the way I did before that movie. But I had remembered that you were in it. And so when I saw the movie, I was like, oh yeah, she was in Just One of the Guys. So I wanted to have the opportunity to ask you, like, what was it like working on that movie with him?
So we're going to talk about this more when we talk about what I write about. So it is fascinating to me, this idea of identity. Who are people really? What do they present? And what do they hide? What do they reveal? What do they conceal? And of course, Ted Bundy was the master of that. He was a sociopath. And there were so many people who thought the world of him, who thought he was a great guy. The character I played was sort of a watered down version of a real woman. And she's the woman who married him and had a daughter with him. And she married him in Florida when he was doing his final trial, when he was convicted and put on death row. So it was very chilling. He was still alive when we shot it. He was still alive when it aired. She was alive. I'm assumingly she still is. So it was a very strange feeling to think that, I don't know if they let him watch it. I don't know if she watched it, but that was very strange. And the book, the biggest book at the time, was called The Stranger Beside Me, by a writer named Anne Rule, who had worked with him in Seattle in a volunteer, maybe a political volunteer arena. I can't remember where they worked together. But yeah, I mean, we'll talk about that whole aspect of who people really are. So that was my big takeaway. I loved working with Mark Harmon. He was a terrific guy. And it was such a disturbing story, though.
It sure was. I recall an interview with him where he said that he got so into the character that even when he would go home, his dog wouldn't have anything to do with him, because I guess he just picked up on, that he had gotten so into the character, was kind of in a dark place in playing that role. But yeah, as I was going through your filmography, I came across that and I was like, I've got to ask Deborah about that movie, because it definitely was a very chilling film. So after starring in those films and those sitcoms, you decided to transition away from acting, and you and your family went to France. And you decided to stay in the film business, but you were doing something completely different. And so I found this fascinating. You wound up working for Canal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so tell us a little bit about that.
So that came about interestingly. So I got married and had 2 children. And my perspective on acting changed when I had these 2 children. So you know what it's like having little ones. And picture LA at the time. Well, LA anytime. LA is vast. It's this enormous city. And this was before anybody could email you a script or even fax you a script. So 6:00 in the evening, with little babies, it's sort of dinner, bath, and bed, and you're kind of getting on this clock to have this day end. Please let the day end. And I would get a call to drive an hour to pick up a script. And so the bloom was off the rose, shall we say, at that point. Life became complicated and difficult. And I was still working. I did the Liberace movie after that. I did 21 Jump Street. I did a very small role in a movie with Matthew Broderick called Out on a Limb. So I was still working, but it was just becoming more complicated and difficult. And my first husband, who grew up in Paris, he's an American who grew up there, had the opportunity to go back and help his mother with a project. And it just seemed like an incredible once in a lifetime opportunity. So we moved to France in the early 90s. Our kids were 1.5 and 4.5. And then I really just fell into that job as a reader for Canal. I was at a dinner one night with a woman who was really running the development department, and we got to talking about scripts, and she gave me a shot to try it, which was that when all studios use readers, and it really is, an artsy equivalent of piecework, you're really a freelancer. And it began this slow pivot, which took a long time for me, to becoming the writer I eventually did become, because in reading extensively for a living and in having to synopsize other people's writing and then having to edit it, it really helps you to clarify your thoughts about what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah. It gives you such a great perspective as to the kind of things that the studio is looking at. And, obviously you're coming into it with your perspective from having worked in Hollywood, having a sense of what works and what doesn't. I'm reminded of when I read that you had worked for Canal, that I feel like the 90s was a kind of a heyday for Canal. I think they were getting much more recognition globally for the movies that they were cranking out. And also during the 90s, I think was an opportunity for French filmmakers and actors that were getting more prominence outside of Europe. I think about Luc Besson and Jean Reno, and a lot of the films from Canal, like really starting to take kind of gaining importance or significance overseas, here in America. So you were working there for a few years, and then I understand that you eventually did come back to the States, but you kind of continued that working with writing and story when you came back to the States, and you wound up at Miramax.
I did. I was hired by Harvey Weinstein. So that's another, talking about this idea of identity and who people are and what they reveal and what they conceal. And I certainly don't dispute anything. I did not know that aspect of his life. I wasn't personally acquainted with his life in any way. I was in the story department, and I had a very good experience at Miramax. It was an outstanding experience. I learned a tremendous amount. That was my writing school, because Miramax was at its heyday.
Oh, yeah.
And I got the opportunity to work with the best and the brightest. And it was very intimidating to be involved in an editorial capacity. But again, going to use that word again, clarifying, really, it helped me hone my thoughts on what worked and what didn't.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when I read that you worked at Miramax in the time period that you were there. It was really the golden age of Miramax. I mean, they were cranking out hit after hit. And I saw that some of the films that you worked on, I mean, these were award-winning films, critically acclaimed films. And I noticed, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you worked on Emma with the Gwyneth Paltrow.
I did. And I like to think, and I think Doug McGrath would tell you the same thing, that I had some influence in the Weinsteins acquiring Emma. There is a collective unconscious. You see it everywhere. And this was the moment when all of the Jane Austen films, the screenplays were coming in, and there was something about that screenplay that just sparkled. It existed at a higher level. It just kind of danced off the page, and we did acquire it, and I think it came out beautifully. I think it's a wonderful version of Emma.
It really is. And I recently saw the new version of Emma that came out, I guess, last year. And I enjoyed it, but I think the Gwyneth Paltrow version, it has a charm to it that is hard to duplicate.
It was more natural. The version that came out last year was really stunningly beautiful, but it was very stylized. There was a choice that was made to do it in that direction, and I did enjoy it. But the Gwyneth Paltrow version was just more natural and vibrant, I thought.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. I enjoy that movie a great deal. So after you worked at Miramax, the next thing that I had uncovered was that you and your husband renovated a theater, the Avon Theater. And this to me is just a wonderful story. So yeah, I'd love to hear about, the work that went into that.
So my husband made his name and his life and his career in the financial world. He's a mutual fund guy. And when we met, I had just gone through a very sad divorce and, was in kind of a low place, and then wasn't looking to meet anybody, met him. And as we were getting to know each other, he said, well, why don't we open a movie theater together? You're in the movie business. I said, well, I don't know anything about that end of the movie business, which I did not. So we really stumbled forward. And I think that is another great lesson in my life. Sometimes the best person to do something is the person who doesn't know what he or she is doing, because that is the person who will just forge ahead. And sometimes the more you know, the more you hold back, because you know the odds against actually achieving something. So he acquired the building. It had been a cinema. It had been closed since sometime in the 90s. This was now the early 2000s. We met with a lot of people. We got some kind of Sherpa to take us through the process in the town of Stamford of what we could and we could not do with this building. And one of the things they said is, you must have fixed seats, because they thought if Chuck and I got hit by a bus, they didn't want somebody to be able to come along and do, I don't know, mud wrestling or something. They just were concerned about unintended consequences. So fixed seats was a big deal, which later became complicated when we tried to do fundraisers in the theater, and we might have liked to be able to move the seats and do dinner tables or something.
Right.
So we got going, and along came this incredible young man by the name of Adam Birnbaum, and he had just finished his college work. He had done his graduate work with an independent art house cinema in Long Island, and he wrote us a letter, and we started working with us all together, and he's still working with us. He's our director of programming. So my husband is a very good strategic thinker, and one of the smartest things he did with Adam was he allowed Adam to take on outside booking gigs. So Adam, I couldn't say now after COVID, but Adam has been the director of programming for the Avon, but is also booking for 40 other cinemas around the Eastern Seaboard. So even though we're not a chain, it gave us some critical mass, some heft with the studios. So Adam has a real presence. And a really cool aspect of being in the independent cinema world, and I don't know what will happen post-COVID, but there was this gathering in Utah called the Art House Convergence. And all these people would show up. There are hundreds of these theaters in North America, and there's every kind of subset to this world. There is a whole group of cinemas that were originally silent movie theaters, and they have a particular type of organ that is still in house. That's a group. There's another group in the 1920s, Howard Carter opened King Tut's tomb, which was a big thing. And there was Egyptomania around the world. People loved all things Egyptian. So there's a whole subset of Egyptian theaters, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's been a great thing. I've met incredible people, made a deep bond with the actor Gene Wilder, who played into me eventually writing. So it's been the joy of my life. And we were able to reopen the Avon in the middle of June last year, and we've been able to run it with super safe protocols, taking temperatures and separating. So it's been a good thing.
That's so great to hear for so many reasons. I just love the idea of renovating and kind of preserving the historical aspect of a theater, and then to be able in the midst of a pandemic to keep it open, and obviously with the precautions, but because I think one of the things that was deeply felt when the quarantine began is that just being able to go to a theater and see a movie with other people, that kind of shared experience. I know I was certainly missing it, and I know Garrett was too.
Yes.
In fact, it's a lot of what led us to this podcast, because we were just missing being able to watch things together and enjoy that experience. But you mentioned Gene Wilder, and I think that's a perfect transition to really get into what you've been working on lately. I just have to say though, when I heard about your connection with Gene Wilder, I, like a lot of people, I just have always adored Gene Wilder. It's just his career, his talent. And when I heard about the connection you guys had, it just reaffirmed my thought that this is a man who was just a kind soul and just a good man. And it's, obviously rest in peace, Gene. But I'd love to hear about the story of how you guys met and what led him to see your writing and the encouragement that he gave you.
So Jean lived in Stamford for many years. When Gilda Radner died, she had left him this beautiful farmhouse and piece of property. And then he remarried an extraordinary woman named Karen. And I think they were a wonderful love story, just seeing them. They took dance lessons together. And I remember one time I called their house, and their outgoing message on their answering machine was the two of them singing a duet. They were charming and funny and loving. So Jean and Karen lived in Stamford and they loved the Avon. So at a certain point, there was someone who was on our advisory board who I think approached him on the tennis court and asked if he wanted to get involved. So what we put together, and it ran for about 10 years, was a series called Wilder's Picks. And every autumn, he would come once a month to present a film. And it was always two classic films, but very obscure because he had a great body of knowledge about film, and then one of his own. And by the time it was one of his own, you know, we had to have security guards because people would fly in to be in a cinema with Gene Wilder talking about one of his movies. So in the process, over the years, we had a writing correspondence, not letters, you know, emails. And at some point he said to me, "Are you a writer? I think you're a writer." And I said, "Oh, well, you know, gosh, I belong to writing groups and I've written a screenplay and this and that." And he said, "Well, I would be honored to read something you've written. And how kind is that?" So he read it. He sent me some notes and real encouragement. And every time I would see him after that, he would say, "Are you writing? I hope you're writing." And at that point in my life, Chuck and I were doing a lot of these renovation projects, historic restorations. I was raising my children. I was involved with a lot. So my writing, I was writing, but it was very back burner. I was writing short stories and things like that. So for me, 2014 was a change year because my youngest daughter really left the house. And I thought, if I am ever going to do this, I probably had better look at doing this right now. And I had the idea for the first book percolating around in my head. So I began to write, and I began to tell people I was writing a novel. And my husband was like, "Oh my God, that's so embarrassing. You shouldn't say that because, you know, you just don't know." And I thought about that. And I realized that, yes, I could fall on my face and fail at this novel. And the worst thing that could happen from that is these friends I had told, because I certainly didn't have a public platform to tell anybody. These friends I told might say, "Hey, Deborah, whatever happened to that book you're writing?" And I might in the end have to say, "Not much." But it was really important for me to put that flag in the sand. And I didn't yet call myself a writer, but I said I was writing. So it made a huge difference. About 6 months after that, I was having coffee with a dear friend who's a very accomplished writer. And she's written 7 books. Her name's Harriet Cole. And she was an editor for Essence magazine. And she's written a lot of books on African-American wedding ceremonies and really cool nonfiction books. And she said, "So Deborah, how many days a week are you writing?" And I said, "Well, Harriet, I'm writing about 1 day a week." And she looked at me and she said, "You are never going to finish your book writing 1 day a week." So I listened to her, and it made a huge difference. I got my schedule together, and at that point, I wasn't able to do it the way most writers advise you to do it, like write every morning, always the same time, because I had Avon board meetings or I had other things I had to do. So I would use my trusty iPhone and just chart out about 3 months going forward, and always make sure I had 3 to 5 hours a day to write. And that was very helpful for me by putting it on the calendar. I like declaring I was writing by putting it on the calendar. It was a kind of a commitment.
Yeah. I think that's such a great way of like giving yourself that, carving out that space, but also you're exerting some momentum to kind of move forward and keep going and treat it as a regular, making it a habit, basically, I guess. That's really, it's very good advice. And as a writer myself, getting those people in your life to just kind of give that piece of advice, at the time you need it most. It always seems to kind of help spur you on to get to where you need to go. So I think this is a perfect segue to talk about the books that you've written. And I know that you just released your second book yesterday, Ruby Falls. And I know you've been extremely busy talking to people about it. But we'd love to just, spend the rest of the time we have here talking about your books, talking about your work. And as a writer, I'm always interested in talking to other writers and finding out about your process, like how you think about story, how you approach it. I also love asking other writers, like, what kind of tools do you use? Do you write in journals? Do you just use Microsoft Word? Or are there other things that you do? So yeah, I'd love to hear about your work and talking about Finding Mrs. Ford and now talking about Ruby Falls. Would love to hear more about those.
Okay, so I have always loved this concept of identity. I'm a huge Hitchcock fan. I think he's the master of the identity, puzzle. And so the first book, when you write a first book at a certain stage in life, you've probably had ideas percolating in your little brain for years of things, little extracts you've written or things you're playing with. And the idea for, I'll pick it up, I've got it here, Finding Mrs. Ford, another beautiful cover. And you see this necklace, which is kind of making through that plot point. So August of 2014 was the moment when ISIS was marching into the north of Iraq and killing all these people. And there was a particular group of people, the Chaldeans, which is a group of Iraqi Christians who were very much in the front lines with ISIS and being killed by them. And I had started the book already, and I knew I wanted it to be the story of a woman's past catching up with her. It begins in August of 2014 when the FBI comes to a beautiful seaside coastal house of a woman of a certain age, middle-aged woman of great means, and they're there to ask her about a man. And so I decided to make this man an Iraqi Chaldean. I am from Detroit. There are a lot of Iraqi Chaldeans in Detroit. This is a place where this group, Detroit was the largest Arab population outside of the Middle East for a long while. Yeah. And all kinds of Arabic groups went there, Lebanese, just all these different groups. So the story is the FBI shows up, they ask her about this man, and she claims that she does not know him. And they say, well, that's kind of funny because he just took a plane from Baghdad to Boston and we picked him up in a car on his way to your house. At which point you go back to Detroit. She's a college student. It's 35 years earlier. And she meets this wild girl who convinces her to go get jobs together as cocktail waitresses at a very seedy disco. And this disco happens to have a lot of Iraqi Chaldean men. So pretty early on she's lying. And you spend the rest of the book kind of peeling the onion for why is Sammy looking for her all these years later? What happened in the summer of 1979? And why is she lying? Why not just say she knows the guy? So that is a complicated book because it is nonlinear, and it's nonlinear twice. It goes 2014, 79, back and forth to a crescendo moment, and then it does it again. So one of the big challenges for that book was really charting it out. Like if you see this pen on August the 5th, but you're not really supposed to see it on August the 4th, and you're hopping all over the place in time, you have to chart that out and make sure you don't mess that up. And there was one thing I caught myself in, which I won't say what it is, and it was about a year into it, and I wasn't even writing. I think I woke up in the middle of the night and thought, oh, you can't have that thing happen there, because that would completely spoil that. And so funny thing about writing, no matter how fast you could actually write something, you probably shouldn't write it as fast as you could write it, because there are other things that are going to come to you when you're not writing, when you're walking your dog or brushing your teeth. And a lot of stuff gets worked out then. So that's the first book. It's been optioned by my old boss at Miramax, a woman named Meryl Poster, and her partner. So two women producers. They have someone who's very interested in doing it. I cannot say who it is. It's close, but things that are close can go wrong. So you can't say anything.
Right.
So it's just a weird trying to hold great hope for its future cinematically, but to let it go at the same time because it's out of my hands. So that's how I'm trying to handle that. And then Ruby Falls. So 2 years into working on Finding Mrs. Ford, I was here in this house and thinking about starting another book. Finding Mrs. Ford, I had an agent, we'd done some edits. It was out with publishing houses. The first 2 chapters of Ruby Falls downloaded in my little brain, and it begins in a cave near Chattanooga, Tennessee, called Ruby Falls, with a little girl named Ruby. So it is a double entendre. She's there with her father. She's 6.5 years old, and the lights are off. They've turned off all the lights, and she can hear this waterfall hitting an underground lake. And a tour guide is just giving this speech saying, and the divers have dived down and they've never been able to find the bottom. And this kid is horrified because she can't tell where the water is. She's in a cave. The sound is all around her. And her father lets go of her hand. And the lights come back on. He's gone. So it's 1968. There are no credit card records. There are no cameras. The tour guides are looking at this kid and thinking, she didn't come in alone. She's 6 years old. Who was with this kid? They don't remember. They take her up to the gift shop. They plunk her on a bench. They finally call the police. The police pick her up. And about 10 o'clock that night, her mother calls, realizing that the husband and the daughter are probably not out to dinner. They match up the kid on the bench. The mother comes and gets her, and they're grounded in Chattanooga, Tennessee for the rest of the summer. The mother is dealing with the police inquisition, and the kid is in a state of what we would now call PTSD. 20 years later, she ditches the name Ruby and uses her middle name. Ruby was her middle name, uses her full name, Eleanor Russell. She's a soap opera actress. She's written out of her soap opera under circumstances you don't know quite what, but something's not right. She goes to Europe and meets this dashing stranger called Orlando Montague, and she marries him on the spot. And they are in Rome. They're about to go into the catacombs. She has this attack of claustrophobia, and what happened to her. And she really should tell this brand new husband about this thing, but she doesn't. She keeps it a secret. So she begins this marriage with a secret. Then you go to Los Angeles, and I'm going to stop in a minute. They find the perfect cottage in the Hollywood Hills. She is cast in a remake of the Hitchcock film, Rebecca. They're going a little bit more horror with it. And Orlando starts to change. And he's not as nice as he seemed. And something's funny about Orlando. And she catches him in some weird things. And, the penny is dropping that he may have a secret or two. So that's the setup of Ruby Falls.
Yes, you said Hitchcock at the outset of your description. And yes, that is very Hitchcockian, which is right in my wheelhouse. I love those kinds of stories. I'm really excited about reading the book. Once my wife gets done, I'm going to be grabbing it and reading it myself. Both books. Go ahead.
My mom's from Chattanooga, Tennessee. And so I spent every Christmas, that's where Santa Claus came to Chattanooga. That's where we went. We go to Chattanooga every Christmas, every Easter, every Thanksgiving, every summer. I spent my childhood in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I've been to Ruby Falls.
Did they turn off the lights fully? See, I remember that they did, but maybe that's my imagination. I cannot imagine nowadays they could totally turn off the lights because someone would fall in that water.
Right.
So maybe I have overly dramatized it. So I did go there as a child. And I'll tell you a funny story. I sent the manuscript to Fred Walton, the director of April Fool's Day. We have stayed in touch. And one day in November, I got this lovely email from him saying how much he liked it and how funny it was. He'd been working on kind of a behind the scenes movie business thriller himself. And so after I read the email, I was talking to my dear friend. I said, that's so nice. My dad died when I was 19 years old, and my dad was from Tennessee. And my dad didn't know anything I've ever done. And I have this new book, Ruby Falls, coming out. He doesn't know anything about it. That same day, this sounds like I'm making it up, I went to this storage unit because I have this little granddaughter, Annabelle. And I am determined I'm going to find those little girl baby clothes before she grows out of them, because I wash those things and I pack them up. So I'm looking in this storage unit for the box of baby clothes, which I found. And I find a box of papers and photographs. Out falls a picture of me and my father at Ruby Falls.
Wow.
And I thought it was a little wink from above.
Yeah.
Like, I see you. You don't know I see you, but I see you. So that photo has made its way to the back of the book. The book hadn't been printed yet. And I got very weepy because I thought, so that's why I wrote this book. A little funny connection. Yeah. My father didn't leave me there, though. I must.
What's your experiences there?
He didn't do that.
That's good to know that this is not an autobiography.
Yeah.
Oh, well, this is, we're so excited for you for this new book. And you had mentioned how the movie rights for Finding Mrs. Ford, that it's being developed. When I read the description for the book, my initial thought was this would make a great movie. And just what you've described about Ruby Falls, I think that would also make
that has been optioned as well. So
I'm not surprised.
In a similar stage where each of the options I've done with two different people, they're called shopping agreements. And it means I give them the option to try to place it with a studio, with an actor, with a director. So they're very cinematic. They're both very cinematic.
Well, it's just interesting how, it's almost in a way like coming full circle. You started and now you're coming back to a place where we may be seeing your books on the screen. And, if that does happen, if you had the opportunity to go in front of the camera again, would you take them up on that offer, or do you think you're done with that?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think that's really where my energies lie right now, but it hasn't come up, so I don't know.
How about behind the camera when it comes to like directing or something? I mean, you may not want to direct your own movie, but or your own movie on your book, but is that something that's a possibility, direction?
I don't see it for me. I'm just finishing the first draft of a third book, which came about in the pandemic. And this one is set in Florida. And it's two storylines that right now, I know how they go together. I'm just, at a certain point, I have to have somebody read it to see if they really glue together in the way I want them to. So two things. One, part of it is the point of view of a writer, and it's a fictionalized version of, it's a writer who's obsessed with the murder of her mother's best friend. So my mother's best friend was murdered when the girls were age 12 in Pittsburgh, and it's an unsolved crime. And that's probably a little bit why I'm interested in all these sorts of things. And so half of the book is this writer living in Florida alone with her dog, obsessing about the murder of her mother's best friend, researching it, and, going on riffs about people like Dominic Dunn or Michelle McNamara, who wrote The Golden State Killer, people who have had murders kind of near them with people they love or know and kind of become overly fixated on it. So that's the writer. And at the same time, she is writing a thriller, which is very noir in this case. She's writing about a woman named Linda Alonso, who's married to a man from Argentina. And it's the pandemic, and it's Florida, and it's lockdown, and it's hot. And at a certain point, Linda's Argentine husband disappears on a plane with the children, the last plane to Buenos Aires, and she can't follow. So you have these two things going on. And the pandemic has many useful restraints for a thriller. There's the face mask, which is kind of thrillerish. And my one concern about it now is half the book is very meditative and philosophical, and it's just so darn interesting to me, all these things that the writer riffs on, and then it goes back to the plot and back to the plot. Is that too weird? I mean, maybe only 3 people will read it, but it's what I'm working on.
Yeah, that's great. It's like, I think it's exciting when you're writing something and it's your first draft of just that exploration of just trying something different. So yeah, it sounds exciting. And I think, it is a great setting. And you touched on some of the elements in that with the pandemic. And then, these folks who really get into these murder investigations. My wife and I just started watching that documentary on HBO about Michelle and with the Golden Gate Killer, and just the obsession that she had with trying to figure out who this guy was. So yeah, to me, it sounds like a really fascinating premise. So yeah, I look forward to hearing more about that when it's finished. So I mentioned at the outset, and I know we're coming up to the 7:00 hour, so I don't want to take any more of your time, but I know as a writer, your process, or the tools that you use in kind of fleshing out these ideas in the actual writing. Do you typically work just with something like Microsoft Word, or do you use journals to kind of keep track of things? Like, what is your typical kind of tool set, if you will?
So my tool set is Microsoft Word. I love it. It does everything I need to do. And my tool set beyond that, I take notes on my phone. I take notes on paper. I scribble notes. I'm not really a journaler, and I never have been. I have daughters who journal. I don't know why I don't journal. For me, I think I better tell truth through fiction because I don't get mired in facts and details like that. So it's part of why I fictionalized the writer researching the mother's best friend, because I'm adhering pretty closely to the story, but I also don't want to get involved. The person they think killed her is still alive, and I don't really want to get involved with accusing this man of it. So that's kind of what I do. I always keep a notepad and a pen next to my bed. And so I do wake up a lot in the middle of the night and write things down. It is a question of whether or not I can read it in the morning. You don't want to write one note over another note because you're writing in the dark.
Yeah.
But I have pieces, and then I'll put a pile of all these notes together and kind of go through it and see. Sometimes I repeat things over and over, or sometimes there are little scraps of things I want, and then I'll kind of consolidate it.
Yeah. Deborah, this has been wonderful. It's been great talking to you and learning about what you've been up to, and to be able to talk to you about Just One of the Guys, along with all of the other many wonderful things that you've done. We appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Deborah, for taking time to talk to a couple of movie fans about your life and your work. I think it's true that it's a good interview when you wish you could talk for at least another half hour more. Very entertaining and informative. Thank you, Deborah. For our regular listeners, you'll note that this was our very first interview for the podcast, and I don't think we could have had a better guest to interview than Deborah. To learn more about Deborah and her works, Finding Mrs. Ford and the brand new Ruby Falls, visit DeborahGoodrichRoyce.com. Link is in the show notes. You can also follow Deborah on Instagram at Deborah Royce. Thanks for listening to this special episode of the Midnight Movie Snack Podcast. Join us next week when we go right into the danger zone with Tom Cruise in Top Gun. Support for the Midnight Movie Snack podcast comes from monthly donations made by listeners like you. Your small donations add up to help us make fun episodes about the movies we all love. To learn more about how you can support the podcast, check out the support link in the show notes. And until next time, thanks for listening.